She did not know that the day she said yes to easy money was the day she started losing everything she had worked for. But that is how it always goes. Nobody sees it coming, not until it is already too late. This is the story of Ngozi, a makeup artist, a woman with magic in her hands, and a woman who paid the highest price for trusting the wrong person. If you have ever worked hard for something, if you have ever built something from nothing, stay with this story until the very end. Because what happened to Ngozi can happen to anyone. Ngozi grew up in a small house in Surulere with her mother and her two younger brothers, and not very much else. Her father had left when she was 8 years old, and her mother had decided that same week that she would never again wait for someone else to provide what her children needed. So she sold fabric at the market 6 days a week, and she cooked and cleaned, and she made sure all 3 of her children went to school with clean uniforms, even when the money for the uniforms had required 3 weeks of careful saving. Ngozi watched her mother do this every single day of her childhood, and she understood something from watching it that some people never learn, which is that if you want something in this life, you have to build it yourself, with your own hands, one day at a time, and you cannot stop. She discovered makeup when she was 16, not as something to buy or wear, but as something to do, something to create. She would sit in front of the small mirror in her mother's room and experiment, mixing what she had, figuring out what worked on her own dark skin, on the skin of her friends who let her practice on them, on her mother who sat still for her on Sunday mornings and said, "You are getting better, Ngozi. You are getting better every time." She was not getting better. She was already good. She was getting extraordinary. By the time she was 19, she was doing makeup for women in the neighborhood for small amounts of money that were not small to her at the time. By 21, she had a real client list and a second-hand makeup chair she had bought from a woman who was leaving the business and had painted white and placed in the spare room of their house. By 23, that spare room had become something people drove across Lagos to reach. She had a rate card. She had regular clients. She had a reputation that had been built not through advertising, but through the simple, unstoppable power of women telling other women about someone whose work was genuinely good. She charged fairly. This was something her clients talked about almost as much as her skill. In a city where some makeup artists looked at a bride's desperation and charged whatever they wanted, Ngozi had prices printed on a laminated card, and she did not move from those prices for anyone. What was on the card was what she charged. That was all. She was not rich, but she was stable, and she was growing, and she was happy. Though she did not always know she was happy, because happiness is one of those things you understand better after it is gone. She sent money to her mother every month. She had a savings account that she added to carefully and consistently. She had a notebook where she wrote her plans, a proper studio one day, a space with real lighting and a reception area, maybe an assistant. She looked at that notebook often. She believed in what was written there. And then one Tuesday morning, a woman named Mrs. Nwosu knocked on her door, and everything began to change. Mrs. Nwosu arrived in a car that cost more than everything Ngozi owned combined. She was 51 years old, and she dressed and moved like a woman who had never once had to ask the price of anything. Her husband was Chief Nwosu, a name that appeared in business newspapers regularly and in gossip columns occasionally, a man of considerable wealth and connections. Mrs. Nwosu had heard about Ngozi through a chain of people, her personal assistant's cousin's friend, which was the kind of referral that only happened when someone's work was truly special. She sat in the chair. Ngozi worked on her face for 2 hours. At the end, Mrs. Nwosu looked in the mirror for a long time and then said, simply, "You are very good." She said she had a big event coming. Her husband's 60th birthday gala, 200 guests, television cameras. She wanted Ngozi exclusively for herself and for 8 of her friends who would be getting ready at the Nwosu house in Ikoyi that morning. She named a payment amount. Ngozi kept her face calm and professional. Inside her chest, something was jumping. She said yes. The gala day went perfectly. Ngozi arrived at the Ikoyi compound at 6 in the morning and worked for 10 straight hours, moving from face to face with the quiet concentration she brought to every job. The women left looking polished and expensive, and they knew it and they were grateful. Mrs. Nwosu looked at herself in the mirror before leaving for the venue and said nothing, which Ngozi had learned by then was this woman's way of saying it was exactly right. The payment came through that night. Ngozi sat with her phone and looked at the number for a very long time. After that, Mrs. Nwosu called regularly. Her friends called. Their friends called. Women from Ikoyi and Lekki and Victoria Island began appearing in Ngozi's spare room, sitting in the white chair, paying rates that were far above the laminated card. Ngozi hired a young woman named Adana to manage bookings and keep the space clean and assist on large jobs. She updated the notebook. The studio was feeling less like a dream and more like a plan with a date attached to it. It was in the 4th month that Mrs. Nwosu mentioned the products. She brought it up the way people bring up things they have already decided, casually, as though it is a small thought that just arrived. She said she had been thinking about Ngozi's future. She said real talent should not be limited by ordinary resources. She said she had a connection, a supplier who could provide imported makeup products at wholesale prices, the kind of professional products that the women in her circle expected to find in the hands of any artist they trusted. If Ngozi used these products and stocked them for clients who wanted to buy, Mrs. Nwosu said, she would personally move her into a new level of clientele. Women who did not ask about price, women who simply paid. Ngozi asked about the quality. Mrs. Nwosu arranged for her to meet the supplier. The meeting was in a warehouse in Isolo. The supplier was a thin man called Mr. Emmanuel with fast eyes and a phone that never stopped ringing. He showed her rows and rows of product, foundations and palettes and setting powders and primers, everything in the right packaging with the right names on the boxes. Ngozi tested things on her wrist. She smelled them. She applied them and looked at the results. Everything seemed correct. The price he offered for bulk purchase was genuinely low, low enough that even selling at a modest increase to clients would create a margin she had never had before. She drove home and sat with her notebook. She told herself this was not greed. She told herself this was business. She told herself she had tested the products herself, had been careful, had made sure. She told herself this was just an opportunity that a sensible person would take. She made the first purchase. The new clients came quickly. They sat in her chair and paid without hesitation and talked about their skin and the specific detail of women who had spent real money on it for years. The diary was full. The savings account was growing faster than it ever had. She made a second purchase from Mr. Emmanuel, larger than the first, then a third. She did not think too much about where exactly the products were really coming from. She had seen them. She had tested them. She told herself that was enough. But there is a difference between looking and truly seeing. And Ngozi, dazzled by what was finally happening in her savings account and in her diary, and in the size of the payments coming through on her phone, was looking but not truly seeing. The first sign came on a Thursday morning, 4 months after the arrangement began. A woman named Mrs. Adami called at 7:30. Her voice was controlled in the way that voices are when they are covering something that is not controlled at all. She said that after her last appointment with Ngozi, she had developed a skin reaction, around her jaw and on her forehead. She had thought at first it was something else, but her dermatologist had tested and confirmed it was a reaction to something applied to her skin. She had used nothing new except what Ngozi had used on her face. Ngozi said she was sorry. She said she would check everything immediately. She put the phone down and sat very still for a moment. She went through her kit. Everything looked the same. She could not see anything wrong. The second call came 2 days later. Different client, same problem, a rash on her neck. Her doctor had said topical reaction, avoid whatever you recently used. Ngozi called Mr. Emmanuel. The phone rang and rang. She called again. Voicemail. She sent a message, nothing came back. She called Mrs. Nwosu. Mrs. Nwosu listened to everything Ngozi said and then said in the tone of a woman who is present in a conversation, but has already decided she will not be part of what it costs. She said these things sometimes happened with sensitive skin. She said Ngozi should not worry too much. She said she would look into it. She did not look into it. She did not call back. The third complaint came a week later. Then a fourth. 4 women, all from the same circle, all with skin that was doing things it should not be doing after sitting in Ngozi's chair. One of them described her face as the worst it had ever looked in 40 years of living, and she said it without shouting, which was somehow worse than shouting. Ngozi stopped using Mr. Emmanuel's products immediately. She put every single item from his deliveries into a box and put the box in the corner and did not touch it. She went back to her old suppliers, paid her old prices, and worked with what she knew was safe. But stopping could not undo what had already been done. Mrs. Ademi posted on her Instagram story. She did not name anyone, but she said she had experienced a serious skin reaction after a makeup appointment and that she was consulting her lawyers. Her followers were mostly women in the same social world. The story spread the way things spread in closed circles, fast and thorough and unstoppable. The phone went quiet. Not completely, but the quality of the quiet was different from any silence Ngozi had known in her career. Bookings slowed. Adana came to her with a careful face and said 3 clients had called to reschedule without giving new dates, which both of them understood was not rescheduling. Ngozi drove to Isolo. The warehouse shutters were down and padlocked. A suya seller on the street outside said yes, some people had loaded up a truck about 2 weeks ago and left, and he had not seen them since. She sat in her car outside the closed shutters and looked at them for a long time. She found a product testing laboratory in Lagos and took samples from Mr. Emmanuel's stock. She paid the testing fee from her savings and waited 10 days for the results. When the results came, she read them 3 times. The products were not what the packaging said. The foundations had a preservative that had been banned in many countries because of the skin reactions it caused. The setting powder had a skin lightening agent that was not listed anywhere on the label. The products had been made to look right, but they were not right, and they had been on the faces of women who had trusted Ngozi, who had sat in her chair and closed their eyes and trusted her hands. She had not known, but not knowing was not the same as not responsible. She had been the one in the room. She had applied the products. She had been the face that the women saw, the name they had given to their friends, the hands they had trusted. The people who had sold her the harmful products were gone, unreachable, vanished like they had never existed. Only Ngozi remained. She tried to reach Mrs. Nwosu one last time. She went to the compound in Ikoyi herself. The gateman said Madam was not available. She left her name and number. Mrs. Nwosu never called. The lawyer's letter arrived 3 weeks later. Mrs. Ademi was suing. The amount was written in a font no different from any other font on the page, but each digit hit Ngozi somewhere physical when she read it. 2 more clients had retained lawyers. A third was considering it. She sat in her own lawyer's office in Yaba and listened to him explain her situation with the gentle directness of someone who respects the person enough not to soften what cannot be softened. Her position was difficult, he said. She had purchased the products. She had applied them. The fact that she had been misled was relevant and would be part of the defense, but it did not remove her from the situation. The clients had been harmed. They had a right to what they were doing. She asked what it would cost to settle. He told her. She went home and opened her savings account on her phone. She looked at the number. She thought about every appointment that number represented, every early morning, every wedding where she had arrived before the bride was awake, every birthday party, every client who had come back and every client who had sent a friend. She thought about every night she had moved a small amount across to savings instead of spending it. Every month she had said not yet to something she wanted, because the the plan was more important. She told her lawyer to proceed. The settlement took 7 months and it took everything. When it was finished, the savings account had a number in it that looked like something from her very first year in the business, before the chair, before the client list, before any of it. The studio would not happen. Not now. Maybe not for a very long time. She put the notebook in a drawer and did not look at it. Adana left. Ngozi could not afford to keep her, and Adana had a life to build, and Ngozi told her to go, and meant it genuinely. And Adana hugged her at the door and cried a little, and Ngozi held herself together until after she had closed the door and then sat on the floor of the empty room for a while. The diary had a fraction of what it used to have. The women from Surulere, the ones who had known her from the beginning, before Mrs. Nwosu, before Ikoyi, before any of it, they were still there. They still came. They still sat in the white chair, and they still left looking like themselves, but better, and they still told their friends, though the circle was smaller now and the telling was quieter. She saw Mrs. Nwosu once after everything. It was in a car park in Lekki about a year later. The woman was walking to the same expensive car, wearing the same gold at her wrists, moving through the space with the same density that had once seemed to Ngozi like something to admire. She did not see Ngozi, or she saw her and chose not to. The car door closed. The car moved away. Ngozi stood in the car park and watched it go. She did not feel what she expected to feel. She had imagined this moment sometimes in the months after everything, had imagined what she would feel if she ever saw this woman again, and she had expected something large, anger or grief, or the desire to say all the things she had never been able to say. But standing there in the car park, what she felt was smaller and more true than any of that. She felt tired. She felt the specific tiredness of a person who has carried something heavy for a long time and has not yet found somewhere safe to put it down. She walked to her own car. She sat in it. She did not start the engine for a while. She thought about her hands. She looked at them in her lap, these hands that people in Surulere had known before they knew her name. These hands that could look at a face and understand what it needed before they touched it. These hands that had done nothing wrong except belong to a woman who had said yes to something shiny without looking at it closely enough. The hands were still the same. Nobody had taken the hands. She started the engine. She went home. She made tea. She sat at the table in the kitchen where her mother used to sit and add up figures in the margin of old newspapers, making the money stretch, making it work, doing it without complaint because complaining does not change numbers. She got up and went to the drawer. She took out the notebook. She sat back down and opened it to the first page with her plans on it, the studio, the proper lighting, the reception area, the apprentices. The numbers were out of date. The timeline needed to move further out now, much further than she had ever planned for. But the shape of what she wanted was still there in her own handwriting, in the blue ink she had always used. She turned to a fresh page. She picked up her pen. She started again. Because that is what women like Ngozi do. They do not stay on the floor. They do not let the people who used them and walked away have the last word. They get up, they open the notebook, they turn to a fresh page, and they start again. And if you know someone like Ngozi, someone who is sitting in the quiet after losing something they built with their own hands, someone who is wondering if starting over is worth it, share this story with them. Tell them Ngozi started again. Tell them the hands are still the same. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you want more stories like this about real people, real struggles, real lessons, then you know what to do. Stay with this.